So this is the relationship we were just talking about. Long wavelength is a low frequency, which is low energy. Short wavelength, high frequency, and high energy. And so here we have the electromagnetic spectrum, and we have just a representation, this is not to scale, of the waves. And we see over here, we've got very long wavelengths. The wavelengths over here, 10 to the 5, that's 100,000 meters long. It was a really, really long wavelength. And as the wavelength gets shorter and shorter, here at the very high energy end, we have a wavelength of 10 to the minus 15 meters. It's a decimal point and 14 zeros. Very, very, very small. As the wavelength gets shorter, the frequency gets higher and the energy gets higher. So here we have this listed in by wavelength, and here we have rough guidelines of what these different ranges of wavelength are called. So the visible light is a very small section right in here. And so this part that's down here, going from 750 nanometers up to 400 nanometers, all of that is fitting in here. We just blew it up because this is what we're really more interested in as opposed to all these other things. But this is 400 nanometers. This is not this wavelength. This is 750 nanometers. That's not 100,000. Okay, so just make sure you understand what this graph is showing you, or this illustration. So there's visible light, and slightly lower in energy is infrared radiation. And then microwaves, and yes, that's the same thing that heats the water in your microwave. And below that are radio waves. If we go higher in energy, we get ultraviolet radiation. Ultraviolet is just above the violet end of the visible spectrum, and that's the stuff that'll give you a sunburn. It's higher in energy than visible light. Above that is X-rays and then gamma rays. And gamma rays are so energetic that they can cause a lot of damage and kill you pretty quickly. So I'm just going to go through these quickly. They're also listed in your textbook. Gamma rays, they're the shortest wavelength, the most energetic. They're produced by the sun and the stars and by certain unstable nuclei on Earth. X-rays, as you may know, are used for ascertaining, is your ankle broken? You can do an X-ray, and you can do many other useful things with them, but they are energetic enough to damage biological molecules. And so you don't want unnecessary X-rays, and they do them with the minimum amount of energy necessary. So X-rays are strong enough that they can go through many solid substances. X-ray and gamma rays can destroy cells, and so they can be really useful in treating cancers. So here's an illustration of a brain tumor. So the tumor's inside your brain, there's healthy tissue around it. You can't just go in and cut it out like you could if it was, in your lymph glands or something, because you kind of need your brain, right? And cutting it open is going to damage it and cause more problems than you had before. So what they do is they use radiation from multiple directions. Each of these radiation beams is going to cause some damage to the healthy tissue that it goes through. But your body can recover from a limited amount of damage. So we've got a little damage here, a little damage here, a little damage here. But all of these are focused on the same place on the tumor. The tumor gets a lot of damage, and oftentimes they can successfully destroy the tumor without destroying your brain. Any questions? Ultraviolet light, also called UV, that's the part of the sunlight that gives you a sunburn or a suntan, depending on your ancestry, mostly. Less energetic than X-rays, but obviously can still damage. If you've ever had a bad sunburn, you know that that's no laughing matter. Visible light does not damage biological molecules, and when we are seeing things, it's because the energy of the light causes a rearrangement in the molecules in our eyes. And our brain interprets those rearrangements as color and images. Pretty cool. Infrared is heat, basically. When you put your hand near a hot object, like we heated crucibles, and I warned you, you put your hand near it before you touch it to make sure it's not too hot. You do that and you feel heat radiating off of it. That is infrared radiation. And that can be seen with like a night scope or special detectors. All warm objects, including humans, emit infrared radiation. Here's a picture. So here's a normal photograph of a guy with a couple dogs. Apparently that poor dog had some surgery or something. He's got one of those stupid cones on his head. Why did they choose this picture? I have no idea. Here's with an infrared camera. And so we can see where the man's skin is exposed, his knees and his face. This is seen as red. That's just how the computer-generated image chooses to show it. But that's the warmer areas, and we see the eyes and the ears of the dogs. And then the blue areas are cooler, and there you have proof that dogs' noses are cold. Okay. Any questions? The yellow would be in between. So dark blue is the coolest, and red is the warmest, and the green and the yellow is in between. Infrared photography can be used to find people in the dark, right? So, you're always giving off infrared radiation, and so, night vision. Well, how do you see? Well, you can't see everything with a night vision scope, but you can see infrared radiation, and so you can see where warm people are or warm animals are. Microwaves, those are used for radar and microwave ovens. The reason that the microwave heats your food, even though microwaves are lower in energy than even visible light, is because that frequency of light is well absorbed by water molecules. It's like a special frequency that causes them to vibrate, and that vibration, that increased kinetic energy, results in increase in temperature. And then radio waves, AM, FM radio, cellular, cell phones, TV, other sorts of communication. Those are down on the lower end. Okay, so this is the sort of information that you should be able to spit back at me on an exam. Arrange the colors of visible light, green, red, and blue, in order of increasing wavelength, frequency, and energy per photon. I forgot something. Let's go back to this. Bless you. So the colors here, always the same order. How do you remember them? Roy G. Biv. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Personally, I don't know exactly where indigo is. It's a color between blue and violet. Roy G. Biv. Always in the same order. This is why when a child draws a picture of a rainbow, we know they're drawing a rainbow, but we're like, wait a minute, something's wrong with that rainbow, because they don't necessarily put the colors in the right order. So it's always red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. So back to this question. How can you remember something like this? If I'm doing a problem, answering a question like this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to write out Roy G. Biv. Oops. Roy G. Biv. It's like somebody's weird name. His first name's Roy, his middle initial is G, and his last name is Biv. You could be thankful that that's not your name. So then I have to figure out, okay, which end is high energy and which end is low energy? Well, I sunburn easily, as you may have guessed. So after this is the UV light, ultraviolet. It's like superviolet, right? So here's violet. Ultraviolet is above that. This is higher in energy. So this is higher in energy. And then this end is low energy. So Roy G. Biv, ultraviolet is next to violet. Ultraviolet will give you a sunburn. That's the high energy end. So in terms of energy per photon, that is just energy per piece of light. You can ignore the whole per photon thing and just go, is it higher, lower energy on this scale? Well, green, red, and blue, we want order of increasing. This is something that they apparently don't teach in school. Order of increasing means you put the smallest one first, and then the next biggest, and you end up with the largest. Increasing. So we're looking for red, green, or blue, which is the lowest energy? Well, red is the lowest energy. So when we're listing these, red is the lowest energy. And I'm going to use greater than, less than signs to just be more clear. What's next, green or blue? Green. Green is higher in energy than red light, and blue is higher in energy than green. Any questions? So then we want wavelength and frequency. And this is where either in your mind or actually on paper, draw a picture of two waves. And it doesn't matter if they're crappy. Those are pretty crappy, but it's going to work. And I ask myself, which of these looks higher energy? Well, this bottom one, right? So this is the higher energy. Is this a shorter wavelength or a longer wavelength than that one? Shorter. So that tells me that this end is shorter wavelength, and the other end is long wavelength. And then I can do frequency and say, well, you know, if these are passing at the same speed and I'm standing over here, which one is going to hit me more frequently? Well, it's the one in the bottom, right? So this one's high frequency. So that's this higher energy, higher frequency. That's this new thing. And this would be low frequency. So using Roy G. Biv, thinking about sunburns, drawing pictures, I can get all this ordered, and then I can answer questions based off of what I wrote down out of my head. So in terms of wavelength, order of increasing, so I'm looking for shortest wavelength. Blue. This is the short wavelength end. So blue is the shortest wavelength, and then what? Then green, and then red. How about frequency? Short frequency or low frequency? Well, that's this end. Low frequency, so it's going to be red, green, blue. Any questions?